Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, one American soldier, 16 dead Afghanis, the shooting spree, and the coverage. Journalists and the courts in Turkey, Spain, and Syria. You win some, you lose some. Another leftist leader in Latin America going at it with conservative news companies. This time, it's Rafael Correa and Ecuador. And a child's story from Africa.
He's a very good fighter.
Just not the one you're expecting. In our web video of the week.
He killed all the money. I took his child.
The world's most powerful military is losing the battle for hearts and minds in Afghanistan. When news came out on March 11th of an American soldier and his shooting rampage, 16 Afghan civilians killed, 9 of them children. The story was reported around the world. This was just the latest PR disaster for the coalition. Last month, U.S. troops were found to have burned Muslim holy books. Back in January, that video surfaced of coalition soldiers urinating on the bodies of dead Taliban fighters. In Washington, the Obama administration issued its latest apology, while in Afghanistan, a country that now has a vibrant media landscape, various news outlets, as well as the Taliban's media machine, all had different sides of the story to tell. The killings were in Kandahar, but our starting point this week is Kabul, where, after more than 10 years of war, the coalition's propaganda efforts are being undermined, perhaps fatally, from within.
The United States takes this as seriously as if it was our own citizens who were murdered.
It is absolutely inconsistent with American values.
We are taking steps to ensure this does not ever happen again. I promise you, this was not intentional. My apologies to the noble people of Afghanistan.
We will make sure that anybody who was involved is held fully accountable with the full force of the law.
Sometimes an apology, even if it comes from the White House, is just not enough.
It was a mistake.
ISAF, the International Security and Assistance Force for Afghanistan, moved into crisis communications mode in Kabul. It brought in a heavy hitter to do some damage control. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta did his best to take the horrific news of the shooting spree in Kandahar and spin the story for different audiences.
The coverage, say in the U.S., the spin they would put on a story like this is not for them to lose hope in U.S. engagement in Afghanistan.
Panetta told Karzai, America is committed to staying the course in Afghanistan.
And Afghanistan is the other way around. It's actually to reassure the Afghan public that this is an isolated act.
A tragic situation obviously happened.
So there are two different spins, and you can see it. It's very obvious.
Afghan media really is just focusing on the event itself, that there was an individual going down the line killing people. Now, of course, there's a lot more conspiratorial considerations in Afghan media. Is it possible that one person could have killed so many people? Is it possible that he could have gone AWOL with a weapon?
One of the channels asking those questions was Shamshad TV, a privately owned station that speculated there may have been more than a dozen Americans involved in what the Pentagon calls the act of a lone, troubled soldier. The propaganda war in Afghanistan is a 10-year-old, three-sided conflict. Two of the principals, the Afghan government and ISAF, are supposed to be on the same side, but are not. The third player in that mix is the Taliban.
Till now, Taliban are the most active one. If you try to get, like an example, hold of ISAF spokesman or hold of a government spokesman, it is much harder than to get hold of Taliban spokesman. They are available in their phones. They have a Twitter account which they update quite often, and they have a website which they write any piece of information in 4 languages better than any other two sides.
The Taliban really have an easier game, right? They are mingling with the population. They have linguistic capability, and they also have a better idea of who their different target audiences are.
They tend to understand as to what the immediate reaction to a particular incident may be, and they act accordingly. They understand how Afghans feel, so they don't have to actually consult with focus groups.
They keep posting and sending all these photos of the kids killed wrapped in leaded blankets across. They try to use that to incite the public feelings in the country through internet, through blogs, through Twitter, social media.
The Taliban are, no matter what scenario you look at, much more effective at sort of getting out there and getting their message out first. And whether or not they're right or wrong doesn't really matter, because it seems that getting that message out there first is the message that actually stays. It's a game that the Taliban are always going to win at, period, end of story.
However, that has not stopped Washington from trying and spending to win the propaganda war in Afghanistan. According to a study conducted in the U.S., funding from USAID directed toward media development and training totaled about $65 million from 2002 to 2011, but hundreds of millions of dollars more were spent on Afghan media activities by the State Department, the U.S. Embassy, and the Department of Defense. Much of that money has been funneled into Afghan media outlets. There are now more than 30 TV channels on the air.
Afghanistan has more freedom of speech than any country in the region. But at the same time, remember, Afghanistan is a poor country and most of the media need to get funds from a source. Mostly these sources are embassies, foreign embassies in Afghanistan. They are allied with ISAF. Yes, there are many media, TV, newspaper, I don't want to name them, that they are allied with ISAF or one of the embassies of the country which they are member of the ISAF.
And there are also quite a handful of Afghan media outlets who are not funded by Western embassies, who have different means of funding, be it the government or they are business oriented, they make their own money through advertisements. Even they are not that anti-Western compared to some of the media outlets in neighboring countries or in the region.
The U.S. Defense Secretary did not go to Kabul to offer Afghanis grief counseling. He was there to deliver a message through the Afghan media to try to keep a lid on local emotions and prevent reprisal attacks against American soldiers. Back home in the U.S., though, this story has played out quite differently.
We're leaving, we're getting out, we're making the footprint smaller.
The media coverage of this event is that this is really galvanizing people to ask the question, so when are we leaving? Are we going to leave any earlier? People are not really talking about hearts and minds. What they're really talking about is, why are we here? Why, and with what commitment? And is there any way that we can get out of Afghanistan faster?
In Afghanistan, they are still talking about hearts and minds, at least the coalition is. But for all the hundreds of millions of dollars the U.S. and its partners have invested in the media side of this fight, that is but a fraction of what they have spent on the more conventional weapons of war.
This whole approach of winning hearts and minds of the Afghan people by the U.S. military in itself is not a very easy approach, because you have your uniform, wielding a gun, driving in armored trucks down the villages, and at the same time you're trying to win hearts and minds of people.
There's a fundamental contradiction there that neither the coalition nor the country can escape. Our Global Village Voices now on the coverage of the story in Afghanistan.
The media battle now is not for the hearts and minds of the Afghan people. It's a question of defining victory or defeat prior to a military withdrawal. This week, US President Barack Obama effectively told the media that the mission in Afghanistan had been accomplished. But the remaining problems in Afghanistan will provide ammunition for those media commentators who will argue that the war in Afghanistan is ending in failure.
Mainstream American media accounts of the recent killing have taken their cues from senior U.S. military officials who claim the killings were carried out by a lone rogue soldier. The media fails to acknowledge the systemic nature of the killing of civilians in Afghanistan and Pakistan.
We're always looking for new faces for the program. If you'd like to share your thoughts on the news media as one of our Global Village Voices, you can always connect with us on Facebook or Twitter, where we will let you know what stories we're working on. Or you can get in touch with us the old-fashioned way, email. We're at listeningpost@aljazeera.net. And don't forget, our free video podcast, it's on iTunes. Just go looking for the Listening Post, Al Jazeera English, and you'll find us there. Time now for Listening Post News Bites. The Assad government in Damascus has warned international journalists and the companies they work for not to sneak into the country to cover anti-government uprisings. The Syrian authorities accuse media organizations of hostility in their reporting, and they say that traveling with and reporting on opposition forces will be considered as being complicit in terrorism.
If you know the right people, there's a way round the government checkpoints.
The government is also threatening to take legal action against media organizations should they continue to illegally enter the country. In Turkey, 4 journalists have been released from prison a year after being charged with trying to overthrow the government. The 4 were among 13 journalists accused of forming the media wing of Ergenekon, which was alleged to be a secret secularist organization that planned to topple Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan's Islamist AKP. The court in Istanbul released the 4 after taking into consideration the year they have already spent behind bars and because the charges against them might be changed. 6 more journalists remain in jail, including the writer Yalcin Küçük and Soner Yalcin, the owner of ODA TV. They're awaiting a trial that's scheduled to start in June. The journalists' supporters have called the legal cases a sham based on fabricated evidence, and they say that these cases are all aimed to silence critical voices in the Turkish media. Taysir Alouni, a correspondent for Al Jazeera's Arabic news channel, is back in Qatar after being held in Spain for nearly 7 years. The Syrian-born journalist was convicted for having links to al-Qaeda and acting as a financial courier. Alouni has always denied that charge, saying his only crime was his exclusive interview with Osama bin Laden 1 month after the 9/11 attacks. A European court ruled in January that the verdict handed down by the Spanish court was not legal. Mr. Alouni was freed, having served 6.5 years of his 7-year sentence. For the last 28 years, the front page of Germany's biggest-selling tabloid newspaper, Bild, has featured females in various states of undress. That's all over. The paper chose March 8th, International Women's Day, to announce that its page 1 girl was a thing of the past. The tabloid trumpeted its decision as a small step for women, a big step for all German men, and labeled the change of direction as a spontaneous attempt by male staffers to end decades of sexism. Skeptics are taking a different view. They're saying that Bild's circulation figures are down. The paper needs to attract more readers, particularly among women. And this is a way to do that. Ecuador has been popping up on our radar recently here at the Listening Post because of legal battles and fighting talk between the left-wing president Rafael Correa and the country's privately owned media, most of which favors the political right. Last month, Correa won 2 high-profile libel cases. The journalists he took to court in one case and the authors he sued in the other were all looking at jail time and multi-million-dollar fines had the president not eventually pardoned them. This is part of a larger battle, and depending on which side you're on, either freedom of the press is at stake or democracy is. It's not often that a politician accuses the media of trying to run a dictatorship. Usually, it's the other way around. But that's what's happening in Ecuador. The Listening Post's Marcela Pizarro now on the standoff in Quito between the president and the private media.
This is a story of conflict between a president who came to power 5 years ago and the Ecuadorian media. There's hostility from both sides, and Rafael Correa isn't pulling any punches.
Ya no sean tan puercos. Y a esta porquería le damos la del zorro, prensa como buitre, que esto me causa repulsión, cavernaria, hipócrita.
Right after taking office, Correa took a very confrontational approach.
Medios que conspiran todos los días una nueva mentira, desinforman, manipulan.
Calling the media the unelected business elite.
Correa has consistently disqualified the media and journalists during his time in power. The president calls them his worst enemy, that they are corrupt, mediocre, and they tell lies.
In Latin America, media groups have always served the economic and political elite, so the information has always been biased in their favor. What the government is trying to do is break the links between business and media.
Porque en Ecuador existe una dictadura, la dictadura de los medios de comunicación.
The standoff reached a crescendo last year when Correa took the newspaper El Universo to court for libel. The case centered on an article which accused the president of ordering troops to fire on a hospital full of civilians during a police uprising in 2010. It was the most aggressive action the president had ever taken against the media.
Here we have president of Ecuador, suing one of the leading newspapers in Ecuador, basically because he didn't like an op-ed piece, which was very critical of his performance during the police rebellion on September 30, 2010. It is alarming that the president of Ecuador is putting his reputation ahead of the national interest of guaranteeing a robust public debate.
We published an article by Emilio Palacio, which the president considered libelous. But not only did he sue Palacio, he also sued the 3 owners of the newspaper, as if we all acted together.
That's what Correa said they did, and even though he pardoned the journalists, he's not changed his position. Correa says the media in Ecuador are ganging up on him to bring him down. And his lawyer says El Universo's attacks against the president were not limited to that one opinion piece.
The accusation made by El Universo against the president was extremely serious. And they haven't just said it once, they've published around 700 pages on the same case. That's equivalent of around 2 months' worth of newspaper space on one issue, one version, one point of view.
The trial provoked uproar from media organizations and human rights observers. But in a country that's seen 8 different leaders in just 10 years, Correa's time in power has brought a measure of political stability. Many of his supporters want to protect this and fear that private media could unseat a democratically elected government.
Censurar! Censurar, sí! Fine, let's censor the people telling lies. We're perfectly happy to speak to the press, but only if they're going to tell the truth, not if they're going to be broadcasting bulletins full of lies.
Nosotros hemos venido. We have come to defend the rights of the people against the press, which is against our president. The press is full of lies. All they care about is the money.
Ecuador is one of the countries in Latin America that most enjoys freedom of expression, so much so that the press actually takes the liberty of censoring the president and tells lies about him that they can't sustain.
To counter the power of the right-wing media, Correa's government is setting up a media apparatus of its own across radio, TV and print. This, together with his aggressive stance against the media, has set alarm bells ringing about press freedom in Ecuador.
The president generalizes and says all the press are corrupt. I think he's had more problems with the press than with any political group. Maybe because what the president has done in the last 4 years is annihilate any kind of opposition. He's right to think that the press could bring down a government. But it's not only due to the power of the media organizations themselves, it's the corruption they might be exposing.
Journalists are in a low-intensity war. No journalists have been killed or sent to jail, but the daily pressure forces people into self-censorship. The state is abusing its power in order to silence journalists and the media.
Ecuador has a broadcast law that allows the government to interrupt any TV program with its own political messages, no matter how partisan. Those broadcasts are called cadenas, and in the past 5 years, Ecuadorians have seen more than 151 hours of them.
I've never seen a media apparatus like the one this government has. Every Monday night they broadcast cadenas where they report what the president has been doing during the week. If press has been critical of the president, the government produces its own report to dismantle what other journalists have said.
Tensions are set to mount this year. Last month, Parliament changed a law that will affect the media's coverage of next year's elections. This legislator drafted the law, and these 2 journalists oppose it.
The electoral law states that you can write or communicate everything as long as it doesn't manipulate the opinion of the public to vote. With this law, we're trying to make those papers keep their neutrality and independence. That means they should report in an objective way and not behave as political actors.
One of the main points of this law is that the press will be forbidden to report on anything related to the presidential campaign 3 months prior to the election. Ecuadorian journalists have told us that Even a profile of a candidate could be considered illegal under these provisions. Clearly here we have an administration attempting to control the flow of information.
I think the media really needs to work out how it's going to cover the 2013 elections. The biggest problem is that they're going to ban reports on candidates which are considered biased. However, this is totally subjective. Who's going to decide how much information should be given about a candidate? This is going to be very difficult for us.
Because in a country where the political opposition is so weak, the president says his real battle is with the private media.
More Global Village Voices now on Rafael Correa and the Ecuadorian media.
Correa said that one of his objectives was to show citizens that they don't have to be scared of the media. But he forgets that citizens can criticize him too, using blogs and citizen media. So will Correa go after these netizens that criticize him? This question is inevitable after this case and the wrong precedent and very negative atmosphere that it has set for freedom of the press and freedom of expression.
The reason why President Rafael Correa is still being criticized by the media is because of the comments that he makes. During a press conference, he called for all Latin Americans to rebel against what he called the dictatorship that exists in the media in Latin America, which of course upset many Latin Americans and defenders of freedom of the press.
Finally, anyone monitoring viral video charts this past month will be aware of a film called Kony 2012. It was made by a charity group called Invisible Children. It's about the wanted Ugandan warlord, Joseph Kony. It quickly racked up nearly 80 million hits online. But as the buzz around the film grew, so did the criticism. People started pointing out factual inaccuracies in the film, and they objected to the way it portrayed Africans. Our internet video of the week is of a young Tanzanian boy named Alex talking about his favorite Hollywood film. We're showing this to you because it's part of a trend. NGOs working in Africa using viral videos to try to change the way the rest of the world sees the continent. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.
One day, I noticed when this child, a child was called Jenny. The thieves come to attack that, they take the child of an old Schwarzenegger. But Anodi said, no, I must take my child.
And if you want your kid back, then you gotta cooperate, right?
If you disturb, your child is killed.
I will mail her to you in pieces.
But Anodi is very clever. Anodi, he was saving a lot of things for fighting. He has a knife, the bomb, he has a pistol, the gun, the pistol, everything. Everything is ready for fighting. Now Arnold is going to kill all the people. He see many people they are coming. He starts killing the people. Cutting the flowers. Start killing them again with guns. Small guns. Big gun. He's a very good fighter. And then he was walking outside. You see the police, they come. That police was his father. Our father said,
leave anything for us?
Just bodies.
He killed all the people and he took his child. Thank you.